we go. Okay. This is chapter 53, which is the final chapter of the Sefer Shel Beinanim. And as we've been talking about chapters 51 and 2, we are describing this concept called the Shechina. So a couple of vocabulary words that are going to become important in this chapter. Many of them hopefully will sound familiar. Shechina is the presence of Hashem. The word also is the same word like the Mishkan, where Hashem makes himself known and visible. It's the same word also conversationally for a community, for a neighbor or neighborhood. And it means the perceptible presence of Hashem. Of course, Hashem is everywhere. The distinction is our capacity to recognize and sense Hashem's presence. In this chapter, we're going to also be referencing the different stages, the four worlds, and some of the spheres within the worlds. Hopefully, these are concepts that you recognize. Just a very brief review of them. The four worlds are four stages of awareness. Atzilus means next to. That's what the word means. I am next to Hashem. So I am, that is, it's not the absolute essence and exclusive existence of Hashem. And yet my identity is that I am next to Hashem. So I can't not be thinking about Hashem. You can't have a vice president unless you have a president. And the sphera that we're going to be talking about or mentioning here is particularly the sphera of Malchus. Malchus is the verb form, the active form of the king, melech, the root word. We don't have a word for it in English, but if presidents preside and governors govern, then if we had a verb for kings, that's what it would be, Malchus, the king reigning, ruling, etc., doing the king, the king's role. Now, the distinctive quality of Malchus, and again, if you recognize the image of the seven spheres as two inverted triangles pointing away from the self, right, left, and that pointed center, and then in a second tier of right, left, and that pointed center, those spheres represent the inner character, such as the capacity for kindness, the capacity for orderliness. And Malchus is the implementation of kindness, orderliness, compassion, etc. So the process of making the spheres come to life, express themselves, carries with it two characteristics. On the one hand, that's the whole purpose. I mean, there isn't an innate value in being a kind person if I don't do kindness. On the other hand, my capacity for kindness is essentially without boundary. My act of kindness is very defined. And therefore, my act of kindness is much less expressive of my very existence and identity than my capacity for kindness. Now, Malchus, therefore, could in a certain sense be seen as lesser because it's so pedestrian and ordinary. Concurrently, it is the whole purpose for which there is the essential spheres. So this idea that what's lower is higher, and what's higher, and again, we use the word lower and higher, we mean what is more personal and what is more expressed, what is more innate and what is more demonstrative. This characteristic or this dynamic underscores the individuality and the expressiveness. Individuality is the wrong word. The way it's, to me personally, that it's private, that's maybe better, the private public dynamic. And the Malchus level is often perceived as being, again, less profound. And the innovative point that the Alter Rebbe has emphasized, and you probably can already sense, is it's better that way, because it's always better that way. Despite the fact that it appears and it often feels to be detached and separated, it is actually more profoundly impacted. Not only is it more utilitarian, like the behavior of kindness is more beneficial to the world than the fact that I am a kind person, but it additionally, the Alter Rebbe's point is that it is more demonstrative of the character of, or the sphera, that's the word, the Hebrew word, of chesed, when I do chesed, than when I have the concept of chesed. So not only is it more useful, it is also more profoundly chesed in the act of chesed than in the concept of chesed. So rather than being what we might consider, like I'm calling it almost a disappointment, you imagine a person, they're all gung-ho, they can't wait, and they want to do all this kindness, and then they're given their first assignment, which is to go over the olive bays with a small child, is to deliver a food package. It could feel somewhat disappointing because it's so defined. So the more obvious point is, well, but that's what the purpose of kindness is. The chiddush, the innovative point of the Alter Rebbe is that is a greater profundity of kindness than the concept of kindness. Not only it's more useful, it is more the infinite aspect of it. Well, the same is true with Hashem. One of the primary points, and we know this just from our constant, it's the water we swim in, with the ideas of Hasidus, that mitzvah actions are not just busy work to keep us on the straight and narrow while we await the time when we'll really get to see the infinity of Hashem. That the mitzvah acts are the true illustration and the fundamental essence of the infinity of Hashem. So rather than thinking of Gullus as a time when, well, it's not like it used to be when we had greater godliness, the point of this chapter is that godliness is found more profoundly in this circumstance. And the Alter Rebbe is going to walk us through some using historical circumstances as to illustrate this point. I'm going to talk about the time when we had the first Beis Hamikdash, which contained the Aron Kodesh and the Luchos and all of the miracles. It was truly the most glorious of times. The second Beis Hamikdash, where we didn't have the Aron Kodesh, we didn't have as many miracles, we didn't have the expression of Hashem's infinity via the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, in the same quantity and quality as the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. And of course, our current time, when we don't have the Beis Hamikdash at all, and we don't have the vision of the infinity, the resting place of the infinity of Hashem. And again, this will probably not surprise you, that the Alter Rebbe says that we can have a more profound experience of godliness during this time when God is not as evident as he was during the times of the Batei Migdash, the first or even the second Beis Hamikdash. It is, in a certain sense, more accessible to us now during this time of Galus, as we will see. And again, this is concluding the entire book of the Sefer Shel Beinanim. And as we've talked about, particularly over these last three chapters, 51, 52, and now 53, this becomes a lead-in to the Shar HaYichud V'Amunah, which speaks more about the oneness of Hashem, in contrast to what we've been learning about here, which is the method through which we serve Hashem. So if Sefer Shel Beinanim is about the strategy and the tactics of our relationship, the Shar HaYichud V'Amunah is about Hashem himself. And this serves as a sort of a bridge into that idea. So here we go. Perek Nun Gimel, the final chapter of this perek. V'hine, and you see it again, it begins with the letter Vav, which suggests the continuation of this theme. Kishahaya Bayis Rishon Kayim, when the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. Now, the distinctive characteristic of the first Beis Hamikdash is that it had everything about it, the full on, in a certain sense, the epitome although we know it didn't last very long, was when Shlomo HaMelech completed the first Beis HaMikdash. We had all of the evident, obvious miracles. We had the Aron Kodesh with the luchos in its proper place in the Holy of Holies. It was built to the precise dimensions. So even the second Beis HaMikdash was, in a certain way, not as divinely what's the word I'm looking for? Animated. The Kalim had been carted off. It's partially what we read about in Purim. We didn't have the Aron Kodesh, although, and this will become somewhat relevant later on, there is that theory that Shlomo HaMelech hid it within the mountains of the Beis HaMikdash and so on. But we didn't have that same revelation, obviousness of godliness. Shaboy haya ha'aron. We had the ark, the haluchos, which contained the luchos, bebayis kachim in the Holy of Holies. Haisa hashchina. We had the shchina, and again, as we said, the term shchina means the perceivable characteristic of Hashem. You could sense it. Shehi, which is malchus the atzilus. So again, as we mentioned, Malchus is the expression of godliness. It is the action point, like the king. And again, we are jaded from the bad experiences that the people had with kings. But if we think about a true king, there's the unattainable, unapproachable aspect of the king. And then there's the very tangible, very accessible aspect of the king. So that's the Malchus level, is the tangible, expressive quality of Atzilus. And again, Atzilus is the most aware of Hashem level. Like the word Eitzel means next to, so I am absolutely aware of Hashem. It's absolutely on the forefront of my thinking. And the Malchus makes it accessible to us. I mean, again, just at a very simple level, we see somebody thinking, we don't know what they're thinking about. If we are very aligned with them, maybe we can, or maybe from their behavior, we can sense what they are thinking about. So Malchus is the expression of the most profound awareness of Hashem. So rather, and again, this is sort of where the Halter Rebbe is headed, rather than thinking that Malchus is some just diluted expression, because it's so tangibly instructive, we can recognize it as the most profound expression of that characteristic, not just the most useful, but the most expressive. Shehi, which is Bechinas Gilei or Ein Sof Baruch Hu. It is the expression of the revelation of the infinity of Hashem. The Frierdiker Rebbe tells a story that when his father, who was the fifth Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, taught him this chapter in Tanya, his father, the Rebbe Rashab, instructed him that he should learn all the services in the Beis HaMikdash. And then he taught him the relevant application. That is, the avodah of the Kohen Gadol is achieved by every person in their own level, and the Rebbe is sort of the manifestation of this, and this is perhaps the fifth Rebbe training his young son, who's going to eventually succeed him in the communal leadership. So he's showing him how the services in the Beis HaMikdash are not just something of our wistful past, but each one of them is an opportunity for us to fulfill the same role as the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, which is to express this infinity of Hashem into this tangible physical world. So, of course, we are longing for the time of being reunited with the Beis HaMikdash. And yet what we're saying is that it's not just some wistful memory for what once was. It is rather the opportunity for each of us to have this expression of the infinity of Hashem down here in this world. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says here. Shoy Rasham, in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, when we had sort of everything, it was all clicking. Umulu Beshes, and it was invested by Seres Hadibros in the Seres Hadibros, the Ten Commandments, which the literal stone tablets were there in the Aron Kodesh, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy of Holies. So here the Rebbe says, Alter Rebbe says, "Beyeser says, beyeser oz, begilei rav atzam yosim begiluya behecholus kachikachim shalamayla ba'olim esalyenim." That in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, when we had everything functioning in all spiritual levels, we had the full Beis Hamikdash, we had the full dominance of Eretz Yisrael, we had peace in the country, we had a legal system that was absolutely in sync with Torah, we had the Beis Hamikdash with the Aron Kodesh, Shlomo HaMelech. This was, in a certain sense, the pinnacle of our achievement. That experience was greater than even the spiritual concepts. So again, back to the simplistic illustration. The concept of kindness might be sensed, it might feel like it is far more intense and far more profound than a simple act of kindness. And yet what we're saying is not only is the simple act of kindness the whole value of the concept of kindness, it is truly a greater alignment with the infinity of Hashem than the concept of kindness. Now, here, the Alter Rebbe uses a series of real precise words. He says it is greater, that is, when we had the Beis Hamikdash, and then we're going to say, well, what about now? But we'll get there. Right now, though, we're contrasting the spiritual concepts with the pragmatic illustration of them in their greatest quality. And that is in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So the physical structure of the Beis Hamikdash was a greater illustration of the infinity of Hashem than the spiritual concepts of the infinity of Hashem. And again, we all can perhaps relate to this. Sometimes the idea of something is greater than the implementation. But here the Alter Rebbe is saying, don't be disappointed by the implementation. And he really hammers it home with four different adjectives. He says it's beyeser says, it's more so quantitatively. You got greater godliness. It's beyeser oz, it's with more strength, it's got greater quality. It's a greater revelation, more profound, more, there's just more of it, again, quantitatively, and it's more intense, qualitatively. So the Alter Rebbe really emphasizes that the access point of godliness in this physical world, in the times of the epitome of this physical world, which is in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash, is more intensely profound than in the most spiritual of spiritual circumstances. Why? How could this possibly be? Isn't there going to be the limitation of the physical, or wouldn't we assume that the limitation of the physical is demonstrative of a limitation of the spiritual? So we say, the 10 Commandments, and again, we're not talking just about the concept of the 10 Commandments, but we're talking about the actual physical stone. Hein klolis ha-Torah kula, are Torah in all of its inclusion, meaning a basic question. It's not really directly relevant to the topic here, but it's something the Alter Rebbe references. Why do we have the 10 Commandments? We know that we have 613 commandments. So what is special about these 10? Like, why does Hashem give us these 10? And as we have all encountered, there's a perception, a misperception that we have only 10 commandments. So why is it, I mean, what is the concept here? So we explain that these 10 commandments are the general principles. Ultimately, every mitzvah can be traced back to one of these 10 commandments. We further underscore it and we say you could trace it back to the first 2 commandments. I am Hashem, that's the source of all the obligation mitzvahs, meaning why should I shake the lulav? Because I'm Hashem. Why should I put up a mezuzah? Because I'm Hashem. Why should I eat matzah? Because I'm Hashem. And the second of the 10 commandments, is do not have other gods before me, meaning don't submit to any other authority other than me. So why should I not steal, even though I want to? Because Hashem said, don't make any other impulse an authority. So even though I really want it, but that's making a different authority before Hashem, a different God. And why should I not eat chametz, etc. And then the Alter Rebbe will later say in Tanya, this is a little bit off topic, but just to finish this idea, that ultimately it's all really comes down to the first commandment, I'm Hashem's, therefore do what I want and don't do what I don't want. Or you can even further compress it into the first word. Hashem says, Anochi, I am. My reality is a reality, and your reality is a manifestation of my reality. So why should you listen to me? Because Hashem, because I am the only true existence, etc. But at this point, what the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing, and again, this hopefully sounds incredibly obvious to us, there is such a position out there in the world of, Torah people. So I'm not talking about rebellious, but in the world of Torah people, there is the position that argues to the contrary, that Torah study and mitzvah actions are only a representation of what's really going on in some deeper spiritual sense. And if we would so merit, we would have the opportunity to see that. Now, again, this is such a core point that we see embedded in every aspect of Chabad Hasidus that it may seem incredibly obvious. But to use an illustration, sort of the end game back to the beginning, if you know where you're going, so then every step along the way is contributory to that objective. There is a dispute in the Gemara, that's not surprising, as to what is the end. What is it that, God willing, Mashiach will come today, 17th of Adar Sheni, and we'll have the Beis HaMikdash. Then what? So there's two opinions. One opinion is, that's it. That's the greatest thing. It'll be the resurrection of the dead. There'll be a total symmetry and seamless, frictionless oneness between the physical and the spiritual. Another opinion is, no, eventually we will complete the mission of all of creation. We will completely mine all the godliness that is contained within this physical world, and we'll get to the point where we no longer need to have this physical world. And this is why we have quotes from in the Talmud and other authoritative writings that seem to constantly be all over the place. One says that in the future there will be mitzvahs. Others say in the future we won't have to do mitzvahs. Some say the greatest level is olam haba, spiritual existence, souls without bodies. Other times we say it's the coming to life of the dead, the seamless interface between the physical and the spiritual. These are all ideas that I'm sure everybody here has heard bits and pieces of in different perspectives. What is the ultimate, sort of plan or theme that separates these opinions? So one philosophy is the ultimate objective is to demonstrate that the infinity of Hashem and the finity of this world are absolutely uniform. And the whole ultimate objective, which again, you recognize the Alter Rebbe's quote from the Medrash Tanchuma, that Hashem's ultimate purpose and passion for creating the world is that this physical world should be absolutely unified with the infinity of Hashem. And therefore, if that's the goal, then every step along the way, every time we do a mitzvah, we are essentially touching on the very essence of Hashem. And the, quote, higher worlds, that is the worlds of the spiritual, where there's a greater innate awareness of Hashem, are only a step down from total awareness of Hashem. Because if we went even to the world of Atzilus, or again, we use the term, the stage of awareness of Atzilus, there's still me and Hashem. So there's still a certain detachment. And this is why we talked about, you recall from a few chapters ago, how the angels are, I'll use the word, envious of our opportunity to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem. And that's why they could only say that God is holy, but holy meaning detached, separated, off to the side, admired from afar. Blessed is the glory of Hashem in his place being literally this place here in the physical world. And where do we get the true one infinity of Hashem? In the physical mitzvah performance. It doesn't always feel that way. Just like the planning and thinking about kindness and or whatever the concept is can be incredibly inspiring. And then the actual execution of it can be sort of ordinary or maybe even mildly disappointing. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe is underscoring, that's only because we don't recognize the infinity of godliness that we are experiencing in that moment. We don't sense that. It is there at that moment in a more profound, more godly than in the loftiest of spiritual circumstances. And again, I've shared this before. I mean, experiences that just anecdotally of people who they start to become involved and so on. And then at some point they're like, okay, when are you going to let me in? When am I going to get to learn the secrets? When am I going to get to see that infinity? Or just to share another, again, anecdotal illustration that hopefully captures the point. I remember in 1985, Yud Beis Tammuz, which is the celebration of the previous Rebbe being released from Soviet prison. So it's a big Chabad celebration. The Rebbe often refers to it as the last evident, obvious miracle. The previous Rebbe was arrested that night. 11 other, Lahavdil clergymen were arrested, and they were all killed that night. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was sentenced to death and then to harsh labor, and then he was eventually liberated. It's a big simcha. People recognize it. It's a big celebration. That year, it was on a Thursday. And the Rebbe announced that he was not going to make a Farbrengen that Thursday. Instead, he was going to Farbreng on Shabbos. So much so, I happened to have been in the yeshiva in England at the time. And Rabbi J.J. Hecht, Olav Shalom, came to England because there wasn't going to be a Farbrengen. They brought him out to be the guest speaker. So they had a communal Farbrengen. And, after the Farbrengen, then there's the Farbrengen after the Farbrengen. And I remember Rabbi Nachman Sudak, Olav Shalom, who was the head shliach of England, he was Farbrengen about what a terrible thing this is, that there's no Farbrengen on Yud Beis Tammuz. And it was very, very upsetting, like there's no Farbrengen. So the Farbrengen is going on. Now, England, this is just my personal experience, so it's 6 hours later. So at about 9 o'clock New York time, which was whatever it is, 2 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden the Rebbe announced he's making a Farbrengen. The Rebbe had said he's not making a Farbrengen, and now the Rebbe said he's making a Farbrengen. And it was like, we couldn't believe it. So I remember, and here's the point of my long story. So Rabbi Shmuel Lu, I said to him at the time, I said, wow, we should have Farbrengen that we want Mashiach. We're Farbrengen that we want to Farbrengen. And now it's happening. So he said to me, and it still struck with me, he said, that's what this is. He says, when the Rebbe has a Farbrengen, it's like you have the revelation of godliness. Now, again, my personal bias acknowledged, we're fans. So clearly we have I have a great bias. I would say this is that point. Like when we came to the Rebbe's Farbrengen, that's it. Like, it's not like, well, I wonder what's on TV tonight. I mean, this is it. This was total focus. Totally. This is where you knew to be. This is the most godly experience you could be having at this moment, etc. Now, to again underscore this idea, we know that in the 1940s, I don't know exactly what year, when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America, we just had the anniversary, the 9th day of Adar II. So the Frierdiker Rebbe created this program that's goes on to this day, it's called Release Time, which is that in New York State, and maybe there's other places as well, there's a law that they can take children out of public schools for 1 hour for religious instruction. Now, in the 40s, there weren't so many day schools. The Jews had just come and the war and so on. So like when my friends' parents did this, they would have hundreds of kids. I did it when I was in yeshiva. We had, a dozen kids. And you take these kids out and they'd learn with them for an hour and make a bracha and have potato chips, that kind of thing. Anyway, So in the 1940s, when this first started, just to give a local taste to it, so the rabbis Shanowitz, when their father, Shalom, came to America, he escaped from Russia and somehow, through 10 miracles, he arrived in America. And he arrived Erev Shabbos. And this was, I think, already in the lifetime of our Rebbe as being Rebbe in the 50s. I don't know what year it was exactly, but he came with nothing and didn't speak a word of English, of course. So they introduced him to the Rebbe. New Bachar, you made it. So the first thing the Rebbe said to him, are you going to go to what they used to call Wednesday hour? So he doesn't speak a word of English. He doesn't know what they're talking about. The Rebbe said, so he said, yeah, sure. So this was so central. Anyway, the point to this long story is that in the 1940s, so this is the Frierdiker Rebbe is the Rebbe. So they have, how many yeshiva students are there? There's a few guys in 770, and these guys are serious guys, So most of them, they don't want to go. It was so odd. Today it's in our common behavior, but at that time it was like such an odd thing to leave the yeshiva, and had to take a bus or a train and go somewhere with these kids, and it was so out of their thing. And these guys were like serious guys, so they wanted to sit and learn. They didn't want to go on this thing. It's not for me. I'm not the camp counselor type. So our Rebbe would come into the Beis Medrash and turn the lights off on them, like, no, this is the call of the hour. So again, I know this is a long story, but I think there's a point to it. So this was the theme of it. So Rabbi Cousin, who's Mrs. Flinkenstein's father, he was just here on Purim. He tells a story. It's on the Living Torah that he, was a bacher at that time in the yeshiva, and he used to go. And at that time, and this was probably already into the 50s, when a bacher had his birthday, he could have yechidus with the Rebbe. So he was having his birthday. So he said to the Rebbe that his birthday that year was on Wednesday. And we know that amongst Chassidim, a birthday is a time for introspection and additional Torah study, etc. So at that time already, all the boys were going on this release time program, Wednesday hour. So he said to the Rebbe, yes, maybe that since that year, his birthday happens to be on Wednesday, so he shouldn't go. He should take that time and again, serious guys, and be introspective and do extra studying and so on. And the Rebbe said, no, on the contrary. If you would know, and I think the term the Rebbe said, how envious the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Moshe Rabbeinu are that you learn Aleph Beis with these children, you wouldn't bypass it for anything. Something along those lines. Anyway, the reason why I tell this whole long story is to illustrate this point. So the presumption is, and it's not an unreasonable presumption, that it's really a more spiritually profound experience to sit and study Torah. Okay, we understand that there are these kids and they don't have anyone to teach them. So therefore, there should be a kind of Mesiras Nefesh. I should give up the loftiest spiritual pursuits in order to be helpful. In other words, I should do them a favor. And we've all had favors done for us by someone who's doing it with enthusiasm, and someone does you a favor like they're, quote, doing you a favor. So basically, it's a step down, but it's a worthwhile step down because, it's a nice thing to do. Almost nebuch kind of thing. Or we could see, and this is the point that the Rebbe was making when he's turning the lights out on these guys, that it's not because they wanted to do something more fun. They were serious guys, like the Rebbe told Rabbi Cousin. Or like this idea that when the Rebbe has the Farbrengen, that this is the greatest connection with Hashem, even though, again, quote, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like it's just sitting there with some kids and singing some songs and teaching them maybe a little bit about the Parsha or some Aleph Beis. It doesn't feel like this intense, incredibly dramatic spiritual experience. And this is what the Rebbe is saying here, the Alter Rebbe is saying here, that we might have thought that the greatest spiritual experience is in heaven, is in spiritual worlds. And here we're saying that it's even greater in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so what about us? So we're getting there in this sort of trickle down process. So why, in fact, is that the case? So this is what the Alter Rebbe said, that the source through which all Kedusha, all presence of Hashem passes into this world is through Torah. And Torah is housed literally in the luchos, in the tablets, which were housed in the ark, in the Beis Hamikdash. And that is all of Torah. So it is most profound where it meets up with the objective for which Hashem created the world, which is the seamless, frictionless alignment of infinity between the infinite Hashem and the finite world. So the Alter Rebbe says, as we mentioned, the 10 Commandments are all of Torah. That it is the expression of, and I use first just the basic terms here, and then we'll come back and explain them. The supernal wisdom, whatever that means, which we'll talk about, that is higher than the world of revelation. Again, we'll talk about it just to get the terminology. And in order to engrave them in physical stone tablets, it does not come down through the process of hishtalshalis, again, some lingo here, which we'll come back to, this physical world. Because this physical world is functioning with gashmius, with the rules of nature and so on. And the luchos are made by Hashem. And the writing itself is divine writing, which is higher than the nature of this world. Okay, so this is a lot of terminology. Let's back up and try to take it piece by piece and see if we can understand it. So, a core point which we have seen a few times already, and we recognize that Torah is not just really good ideas that if we were really smart, we would have thought of it. And although it is the smartest ideas and the most useful ideas and the fairest ideas and the best system for setting up a society and for government and for commerce, all of the above, check, 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 that's not its true essence. Because again, if we identify it only at that level, not that it's not that, but if we identify it only at that level, then we are essentially positing that the value of Torah is that it basically satisfies me. I mean, at some fundamental level, it's useful because I like it, because it's meaningful to me, because it's what's I'm looking for. It resonates with me, etc. Ultimately, what we are always emphasizing is that Torah is truly the will of Hashem. Yes, Hashem really wants you to eat matzah on Pesach. It's not just because it helps us remember that we went out of Mitzrayim. It does that too. It's not just because it teaches us about humility and all the different moral, ethical lessons we derive from matzahs we've talked about so many times. It's that the essence of Hashem's will is expressed in our execution of this mitzvah action. And the teachings of Torah, the conceptual ideas of Torah, are the absolute true true wisdom of Hashem. We say wisdom, again, very important. It's not just because it's really smart and works functionally within the rules of physics and law and Euclidean geometry and so on. It is the most expansive aspect. Remember, chachma, we translate it as wisdom, doesn't mean your SAT scores or what you got, how many pages of the Talmud you know. It is the ability to engage the expansiveness, the infinite, like imagination. It is that characteristic. So Torah is the most profound. Now we have, again, this general rule. How do we know that this physical world is the most important place that Hashem wants? It's because after he created this world, he stopped creating. It's like that joke, why is everything always in the last place you look for it? Because once you find it, you stop looking. I mean, that's the basic idea. Once I found it, I don't. So Hashem creates stages and stages and stages. And the last stage, we say it in the Friday night davening, Sof Maisa b'machshava techila. The last thing you do was the whole plan all along. Everything leads up to that purpose and that plan. So this idea that it comes from, or that the Ten Commandments includes all of Torah, further underscores this idea that it is expansive. Even though it's only 10 commandments, which is a defined number, it contains within it the infinity of all of the instruction of life and all of the will of Hashem. And it is embedded specifically here in this physical world. So every other step along the way, which sometimes, again, feels far more aligned and unified with the infinity of Hashem, it feels more spiritual. Every step along the way is only a gradation less of the infinity of Hashem. It's a little less infinite of Hashem, a little less profundity of the infinity of Hashem. It's a shade less because it's an olam, it's hidden, it's concealed. When you get to this physical world, we start to reveal godliness. So godliness is evident in Atzilus, but less so than in the essence of Hashem's very existence. And God is evident in Bria, but less so than Atzilus and less than in Atzmus, and in Yetzirah and less, and in Atzilus. But when we do a mitzvah, that is the infinity of Hashem. The Atzmus of Hashem is in the mitzvah action and in the Torah study. And this is what is further alluded to by the statement that the Ten Commandments is the general inclusiveness of Torah. Again, it illustrates that there is something infinite when there seems to be something rather finite. Now, again, just to touch on the Ten Commandments for a moment, remember, there's no data in the Ten Commandments that wasn't already taught to the Jewish people, either through God teaching Adam the obligation to accept one God and not to have idols. Shabbos was taught to them already. When the manna fell, they were told not to collect it on Shabbos. Esav was rewarded for honoring his parents. Cain was punished for killing. The prohibition against stealing was already taught to the 7 Noahide commandments. So what impact is there in the 10 commandments? It's again concretizing, and I mean that pun, because it's a physical stone. There's nothing less naturally evident of godliness than stone. It doesn't even show life like a plant. And that's why Hashem embeds the commandments, the most infinite aspect of Hashem, into the most finite entity, a stone. It doesn't grow. It doesn't expand. It is the least naturally evidently godly substance. We talk about, remember, the 4 primary categories of substance: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. That naturally demonstrates the least amount of godliness. Again, at least the plant grows; it has a sense of life to it. I mean, not to be ridiculous, but we don't have people for the ethical treatment of rocks. Well, we may have people who are concerned about trees and about animals, because there doesn't appear to be anything alive about the rock. And yet, that specifically, or I should say precisely for that reason, not ironically, but precisely for that reason, Hashem embeds the most profound expression of godliness into the physical stone to underscore this characteristic of the fluidity of the infinite, specifically within the finite. The infinite and the finite should be properly combined, in that healthy way. So now we go back into the idea and we see that the luchais are made by Hashem. That is the most profound, what could be, so to speak, holier than the luchais. But what are the luchais? There's just rocks, there's stone. And the writing itself is God's writing. It's higher than nature, embedded into this physical world. To illustrate this rule, that the physical world is the mechanism through which we express the infinity of Hashem. And that's why it is housed within the chamber of the Holy of Holies of this physical world, that from whence it dispatches this light and life force to this whole physical world. So the whole physical world is dependent on the godliness that is funneled to it via the mitzvah actions. As you recognize the story that when Hashem offered us the 10 commandments, he said that if you will accept the 10 commandments, then the world will continue. If not, then the world will not continue. So this isn't just like an idle threat. Hey, you better do this or else. He's saying the whole purpose of creation is to have a seamless unity between the infinity of Hashem and this finite world. That's the whole purpose. As such, if you accept the Torah, then there's a purpose to the world. If you don't, then there's no purpose to the world. You know, if a person is going on a trip because they want to, I don't know, buy something, and then they find out that they can buy it without going on the trip, they don't go on the trip. You know, sometimes we get distracted by, you know, what's the objective and what's the process to attain the objective. And it's important that we not confuse the two, but they can be easily confused. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe is making here. So returning to the text, that even the Holy of Holies that houses the Ark with the 10 Commandments is also still part of this physical world. Ella, what? Bechinas Chacham Ilah, the Atzilis, the level of Hashem's Chachma. And again, Hashem's Chachma is not that he knows how to do the more complicated math and so on. So it's not about being smarter in the way that we think of a genius being smarter than somebody else, and so on. But it is about the infinity of Hashem, the most profound sense of the limitlessness of Hashem. Sheklolos HaTorah Shebiyud HaDibros, again, as is included within that collective of Torah, that idea that there's so much more than just the tangible expression. Because again, the 10 Commandments don't teach us anything we didn't know already, to the point that it almost feels disappointing. I mean, we know this. Why are you telling us this? What's so special about this? And as, again, we've probably all heard people trivialize it. I mean, I need God to tell me not to steal. I know that. I have either a social contract or, but again, that's the point, that it is the meeting point between the infinite and the finite. That again, these 10 statements of Hashem that are manifest in the Malchus, and again, Malchus is the expressive of Atzilus, and of Bria Levadan, so it appears, and it's sometimes sensed, that we only can find that intensity of infinity of Hashem in the expressions of Atzilus and Bria, and down here in the ordinary mundane world. We don't experience, I use the word sense, I don't know if that's the proper term, this infinity of Hashem. It just feels like stand up, sit down, lean to the left, don't lean to the left. It doesn't feel like this inspired infinite characteristic. And they seem to be distinctive, the only place that God's infinity rests. And again, so it's like, we missed it. The good old days, it's not like that anymore. We don't have that. It was only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, yes, we are looking forward to the third Beis HaMikdash. And we are wistful for the first Beis HaMikdash, not just the second, but the first. But meanwhile, it's like disappointment. And this is part of what the Alter Rebbe is addressing. And again, I don't know if it's better now, worse now, but you know, in the times of the Alter Rebbe, there was also material suffering as well as spiritual deprivation. We know the whole sort of backstory to the Baal Shem Tov, that people were feeling very disconnected from their relationship with Hashem, even though they were compliant with mitzvah observance, because they didn't really have much of an option. There was no place else to go. The nations around them were hostile in Poland and in Russia and Hungary and that whole part of the world. So there was a lot of despondency. So what are you telling them? You missed it. You should have been here when there was a first Beis Hamikdash, or don't worry, one day there'll be a third Beis Hamikdash. All true. But what about right now? So are we just supposed to tread water spiritually and make do with good enough? So here the Alter Rebbe says, so this level of the infinity of Hashem that was manifest specifically in the Holy of Holies during specifically the first Beis Hamikdash, when we had the Aaron and the Luchais, Haslapshis b'yud hadibrais hachakukais b'luchais sheba'arain b'nes uv'mais elokim chayim. So, as we know, that there was a particular miracle in the very physical structure of the Ten Commandments. I just want to finish the bracket and I'll come back to it because he uses here a Kabbalistic term and then we'll come back. In the bracket, hu alma disgasia, this is called the hidden world, hamakanein, that is nested, 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 ba'olam habriya, in the world of Bria, ki yidu liyadichem, as is known to those who are familiar with the Chachmas Nistar, the hidden scholarship, the hidden idea. Okay, so what does this mean? So here's the sort of facts on the ground. The luchais are described as being readable through both sides. That is, there's no way to illustrate it because it's a miracle. So you have the rectangular stone, and you look at it and you read the Ten Commandments. So, of course, if you looked at the back, you wouldn't be able to see it because it's cut into the stone. But this was the miracle, that it was cut all the way through, and therefore it was more like a stencil. So the whole, let's say, Aleph was cut, it was like drilled all the way through. So it wasn't just cut into the stone to the depth of whatever it is, a few centimeters, but instead it was cut all the way through and through. Okay, so that so far we could do. What was the miracle? That whichever side, whether you looked at the front or the back, so of course in the back it would be backwards, but this was a miracle that it could be read right to left, both from the front and from the back. Okay, so it's a miracle. But as we know, miracles still tend generally to stay within somewhat of the realm of nature. Like the sea split, it didn't disappear. It was still a sea, and if you put your hand in it, you got wet. But it didn't flow. It stood still. So there's a question. This is what makes Yiddishkeit so much fun. So we don't just go, wow, it's a miracle. 1 second. I want to understand how this miracle worked. So we could imagine if you have, let's say, the letter Aleph, it would be like a stencil. But what do you do with letters like Samach and the final Mem, which are a circle? Because there wouldn't be, it would just fall out. There wouldn't be anything to hold it. There's no structure to it. It would just be dangling. So we say, yeah, that's a miracle within a miracle. So again, even within miracles, we have a tendency to align them with some degree of natural phenomena. So it's not enough that you could read it properly front and back. We say, but now this part, a further question. When we talk about this, the splitting of the sea, further other miracles associated with it, that the floor became smooth, it wasn't muddy, and each step, each miracle within, you may recognize we do this in the Haggadah, where we talk about how many plagues were there and miracles upon miracles upon miracles, and we unfold each one of them. So this is a similar idea here as well. So what's going on here? So we say, we have this physical stone, and as we emphasize, there's nothing more limited, more natural, more restricted than stone. It doesn't even have a sign of life, of growth, all the things we talked about. And yet within that physical stone, Hashem embeds not only the concepts of the Torah, Hashem embeds that the physical stone takes on this miraculous characteristic. So in contrast, we don't say lahavda because it's also a kedusha. You go to the koisel. What is the koisel? It's stones. Why are these stones special? Because they were built into the wall around the Beis Hamikdash. But if conceptually I just showed you the stone, you wouldn't innately know that it's special. It's like something that has a nostalgic meaning to you. I mean, there's nothing particularly special about this candlestick, but I find out that it belonged to my relatives or long lost grandparents, so it has meaning to me. Here, the Alter Rebbe is underscoring that the stone of the Ten Commandments, not only that it's special because what is engraved within it communicates this infinite message of Hashem, it is also special because there was a miracle within it. The physical stone not only communicated something of the infinite, it was itself embedded with the infinite to the degree that it shined, or whatever the word is, that's not even the right word. It demonstrated this characteristic of miracle upon miracle. It expressed this characteristic of the miraculous upon the miraculous. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says here, and we're going to come back to it in a moment, that it comes from the world that is hidden, that is nested in the world of Bria. So a couple of terms that's important for us to talk about. The Alter Rebbe mentioned here that it is the writing of Michtav Elohim. It is the writing of Hashem that is higher than the physical world. And again, as we talked about, that it brings this infinite level down here into this physical world. That is this level of the infinity of Hashem in the world. That is the Ma'is of Elohim Chayim, the living God. So the Alter Rebbe here uses two terms. It is the writing of Elohim, of Hashem, so that not only is the message miraculous and divine, it's also the physical imprint is miraculous, the dangling and the right and left, as we talked about. And we said that this is a miracle of Elohim Chayim, the God of life or the living God. So immediately we start to analyze what's the difference between Elohim and Elohim Chayim. So we say that Elohim is again the expressive characteristic of God. When's the first time we are introduced to the term of Hashem as Elohim? Is the first pasuk of Torah. Bereshis bar Elohim. In the beginning of creation, Elohim creates. So Elohim is the expressive quality of God. It's the characteristic of the state of nature. That is, it is the giving quality. It's not the abstract, it is the expressive. Elohim Chayim is the level of godliness that comes from Atzilus that manifests itself down here in this physical world. So again, the general point we're making is the more tangible it is, there's evidence of the greater infinity that is contained within it. So rather than seeing the tangibility as being, maybe this is an exaggerated word, like disappointing, we see it as being expressive of true infinity. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe makes here in the bracket, that it comes from the hidden world. And again, hidden meaning it's more profoundly personalized, that usually nests, N-E-S-T-S, rests in the world of Bria. So usually, where is it comfortable in the world of Bria? Bria means creation. I don't know what it is, but it's a creation. And usually that's where this level of godliness is. And where is it manifest? And through the luchais, through the stone tablets, it is given down to us. It is given access to us, or we are given access to it. It is expressed to us here in this physical world via this process. So the Ten Commandments, the physical stones, not just the message that it communicates, the very stones themselves, which were present in the first Beis Hamikdash, in the Ark, in the Holy of Holies, are a conduit for the expression of this level of godliness that is ordinarily so reserved. And this is why we talk about that. God revealed himself. God offered it to us. He offered it to the nations, and they said no. I mean, he didn't impose himself. He offered it. You make an offer, it could be no. You know, every parent knows. If you say to your kids, do you want to set the table? They can say no. If you want them to set the table, say, set the table, not do you want. So Hashem offers us Torah, offered it to the nations. They all could have said, no, thank you. So that first Beis Hamikdash gave us access to this intense level of divinity through, again, the stone, which doesn't even demonstrate the sense of life. The rest of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to say, okay, that's nice for the first Beis Hamikdash, but what about even in the second Beis Hamikdash where we didn't have the luchos? And most personally, what about us? We don't even have the Beis Hamikdash. Where are we going to have, or can we have access to the infinity of Hashem? And that, God willing, we'll discuss in next week. All right. Have a good week, everybody.